Glad you at least showed up. I was starting to think I would be saying, sorry, guys.
No, I've actually seen this play before. I was trying to remember. I think it was at Ashland. No, I think it was at Utah, the Southern Utah Shakespeare Festival. But what is it? Southern Utah University, I guess, that has the.
Oh, nice.
I can remember sitting and watching the play. I just can't quite remember the context in which. And I have a book actually where I keep notes of, just so I remember like live plays I've seen. But I didn't go grab it.
Well, it's okay. It's all right. Do you want me to? Did you get a chance to watch the Stratford version?
I did.
Good. I just finished it a little bit ago. It's kind of the story of my life. I always plan to watch it over the weekend, and then it's Monday. Okay, I gotta watch it right now.
Actually, I went back and I watched King John.
Oh, good.
And then, yeah, I watched Pericles today as well. That was my afternoon.
Yeah, it was good. I really enjoyed it. I was telling my husband what it was about, and he's like, well, if it was like that, I think I would really enjoy it. He said, you try to read it, and it's like, what? But the story's really fun.
These plays are meant to be watched, not read, you know, and most people, if they encounter them at all, it's in an English class, you know, literature class. And so I think it does turn off a lot of people. But if you watch it, then the language doesn't matter as much. You get the rhythm, you develop the ear pretty quickly. And if it's a good production, you know what's going on.
Yeah.
Even if you can't quite catch every single line, right?
Yeah, because there are a lot of double meanings and things that some of them we can still catch. Some of them are based on old words that we don't say anymore. So, but you get enough to get the humor that's there, to get what's happening in the story, to understand what's going on. So it's really interesting.
Well, and this is absolutely a play of doublings. I mean, characters are playing more than one role.
Right.
And, you know, which makes connections between, it's really a disjointed play. It's one of the problem plays. It's sort of, what? But it having the same actress play the three different female roles, right? The three different daughters, really, because, you know, she plays this, you know, the first daughter doesn't have a name.
Right. Doesn't have a name.
My cat is on my board here, so something happens, it's because the cat is rolling around on my keyboard. And then she plays, what is it? What's her name? Thais?
Yeah.
Who's really presented as a daughter, right? Even though she marries Pericles, she's Pericles's love interest.
Right.
But, you know, immediately she dies.
Right.
So she never really is portrayed as a wife and a mother, right? And then, of course, Marina is the third daughter. So it creates interesting continuities throughout the play. For a play that's really sort of, it jumps all over the place in different times, and it's even hard to know, like, you know, what some of the purposes of various scenes are.
Yeah, it was really interesting. So you'll find this interesting given what we were talking about right before we went live. This play, so Shakespeare wrote it in 1607, they think, 1607, 1608. It was super popular.
Yeah.
It's weird because more modern critics say, well, it's not that great. What's like, just kind of what you're saying is kind of weird, but it was really popular. And did you know that this is after the plague in Europe, when they closed down the theater? This is the play they used to open the Globe.
Huh.
Isn't that interesting?
Well, yeah, you know, it's to me, because my background is in folklore, It's very much a fairy tale, or so it's a traditional narrative more than it is a modern dramatic narrative. The characters are kind of flat. There's not a whole lot of psychological depth to them. Just absolutely random things happen. Thank goodness the pirates showed up just as Marina was about to be murdered, and thank God Diana gave Pericles a dream so he knew where to go to find his daughter. And there's a lot of, there's no sort of explanation for a lot of the motivation. I finished the play and I'm like, well, why didn't Marina just tell people her father was Pericles, king of Tyre, and he would pay them, a boatload of gold if they just bring her back to him. Right? But that's what happens in fairy tales is, they happen because they happen. And so I think that was probably really appealing to a Elizabethan audience. That they didn't have the same sort of expectations of narrative coherence or psychological depth in their characters. They wanted spectacle, and this has got ships sinking, and
and to life.
Yeah, exactly. And sort of miracles and so and fights. There's a tournament and sex, right? And some pretty disturbing sexual content. Between the incest and the prostitution, and that how many times is Marina threatened with rape?
Multiple times, right?
Even when the assassin, the second time when he's sent to go kill Marina, once again, why didn't they just send her back to her father? They're worried about her taking the attention away from their daughter. And he's like, oh, this is great. She's been kidnapped. She'll never come back. I'll just tell him she's dead. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe they'll just rape her and leave her on the beach. I better go make sure she's dead. It's really dark.
Just no, it's that what you said before, there's no person there. It's these stock characters. And so, there's no caring about that because she's the stock character. She's the daughter who's pure and beautiful and, the Snow White kind of character.
Which is exactly a fairy tale character. Right? And someone who's so good and so pure that she's able to turn away all evil, right? She's able to convince multiple men not to rape her. Right. And of course ends up marrying the prince, because that's how fairy tales end.
Yes.
So, and obviously there's nothing wrong with that kind of story. It's enormously popular and has been for millennia. It's, I think, different from a lot of Shakespeare's plays, though. His plays are celebrated for their psychological depth and the sort of how they problematize heroes and humanize villains, right? No one is 100% evil or 100% good. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're pretty sure that someone else helped write this play.
Right. Well, that's one of the things that I was reading, was talking about why would he go from, because this is one of his later plays, why would he go from these very complex tragedies and comedies, complex characters with depth of character, to this different form that is less complex than the tragedies and the comedies. And so what I was reading is, it was that the interpretation of the article I was reading is that he was just trying to experiment with a new form, this romance form, which is not what we think of today. It's not like a Meg Ryan flip.
Right, right.
It's what you were saying. It's those elements of a fairy tale.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes sense because wasn't this, well, when did Romanticism start? 1800s or was it 1700s?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about sort of that particularly named um, genre or style, that's later.
Mhm.
But romances, yeah, are very popular, all the way from the Middle Ages, right? And King Arthur and um, so, and I think there's no doubt that he's playing around at this point in Shakespeare's career. He's quite famous, very celebrated. Um, you could see other playwrights coming up and saying, "Hey, Will, I'm working on this play. What do you think? Can you help me out?"
Right.
And him, okay, I'll give it a shot. Or somebody else wrote most of that play and they put his name on it because people would come see his plays.
Right.
It's another option.
So it's interesting. Yeah. Another thing I was reading was saying how the first two acts seemed not as good as the last three.
Yeah.
I don't know, as I was watching it, I mean, I try to read along with the text, the Folger text while I'm watching. And the Stratford version added lines, they took out lines, there were like whole chunks that were added in and whole chunks that were taken out. And so I didn't see that sharp, like this half was not that great and this half was awesome. And I'm wondering if that's maybe why, because they took out and they added.
It's interesting because I watched the interview that the director did with the two main actors,
Okay.
which they did for the viewing party when this play first came up for streaming sometime in June. And the actor who played Pericles said that he could feel the difference in the language between the first two acts and the rest of the play. That, as an actor, Shakespeare's lines like just sort of led him where the character needed to be.
Right.
Whereas he said he didn't feel that way in the first part of the play. And honestly, I actually read that some people just take the riddle out. They take that first scene out. And I thought that was really fascinating. I was trying to do some research because talk about a fairy tale. I know that riddles are obviously a traditional genre of folklore, but I could swear that there's a specific name for that kind, like a deadly riddle or something like that. A riddle where,
Okay.
there's a lot of riddles where if you don't get it, you're going to be killed.
Right.
But the idea that if you get it, you figured out some horrible secret and you're going to be killed anyway. I could swear that that's also traditional, that you find that in other like folk tales, but I couldn't find anything in the research. I think it gives that much more of a fairy tale feel to it because
Right.
In folktale analysis, structural analysis, oftentimes one of the first thing that happens is something has to push the hero on a journey.
Mm-hmm.
He either has to lack something and has to go out and get it, or there's some sort of villainy, some sort of evil deed which is going to push him away. And of course, in this case, the original or the immediate impetus is he's about to be murdered.
Right.
But the whole first act is about incest, and that this really unnatural evil is what precipitates the whole story.
Right.
But it is kind of weird because it never, they mentioned that at the end. Oh, and by the way, they both died. Yay.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Well, and so what I thought was interesting about the way, because Stratford, like you mentioned, the same characters played. So the king was the same
Yes.
beginning, and then the daughter was the same. And so it was almost the way that they casted it was like a comparison. Like
Hmm.
here's one way it could go, and here's another way it could go. So you can have this evilness because you have a beautiful daughter, or you can be very protective and loving of your beautiful daughter.
And
And
very jolly. You know,
yes,
the king was very jolly, and as she played uh, Thais, she was, giggly and
yes, the dink, dink.
yes, exactly, and go, with her handkerchief. But it is a doubling because so Pericles starts out this play. It's like, I need a wife. Well, I know, I'll go solve this riddle. He's a prince. He couldn't just like find a wife.
Right.
But this is what fairy
Why didn't he
tale.
have a ball? Like,
Yeah.
no.
But this is how fairy tales happen, right? It's something extraordinary sends someone out. Um, and then, that turns out terribly, right?
Right.
He has to abandon his kingdom and go wandering around, gets shipwrecked. And hey, there's going to be a contest, and whoever went, he jumps right back in.
Yes. And his armor just happened to wash up on shore and be caught by the fisherman.
Right. One of my favorite scenes. I love the fisherman.
Yeah, that was a good one.
It's another, I think, criticism of this play is that Shakespeare usually does such a good job sort of intermingling classes.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always like really, sometimes they're funny and so they're the clowns, the lower
Right.
classes, but they're still really interesting and well-rounded characters, and they have impact on the play.
Right.
And in this one, they really don't. When you have the fisherman, and then you have the prostitute, the madam and her pimp.
Right.
But they just, they just get left behind in the story. Pericles even says, "Oh, I'll remember you. When I am back at my station, I'll remember that you gave me my armor back." Did he?
I don't. Yeah. Which isn't that, I mean, that's kind of fairy tale-esque
It
too,
is.
right? Only the prince and the princess are important. Nobody else is.
Yes. And other characters sort of pop up to help and then disappear again. Right? At the right time. And it's very miraculous that, hey, here's your armor. Good thing there's a tournament going.
Right. Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the casket floating along, and then somebody,
Right.
Oh, she's not really dead. You find that in a lot of fairy tales and myths, right?
Mm-hmm.
They'll cast someone off in a box. You just kill them and then you'll know they're dead. But no, you put them in a box and they float away, and of course they survive, and then there's complications later on.
Well, there's a lot of Snow Whitey kind of things. I felt like even that Snow White, well, at least in the Disney version, right? They put her in the box with the clear lid, so she can be revived by Prince Charming. And then the same thing with the evil stepmother, who wasn't really her stepmother. She was the queen of Tarsus.
Yes.
But same thing. You're too beautiful, so I must kill you. I just kept thinking, this is Snow White. It's really weird to see that intermingled in there.
Yeah. And once again, there's no, well, they kind of give the Tarsus, I can't remember what her name is. It begins with a D.
Dionysa.
Yeah, they kind of do give her a motivation, right? Oh, she's taking attention away from my daughter.
Right.
But still, so naturally we must kill her. Yeah. Does not follow.
Right. No.
Except in sort of a fairy tale kind of I I can't stand to think that there's a woman more beautiful than me or my daughter, and therefore she must die, which is Snow White.
Yeah. Well, and even the huntsman who's supposed to kill her and leaves her to run off, in Snow White, she's left to the wolves.
Yes.
Or she's left to the pirates.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's very clearly, and I mean, the whole play is portrayed as a story, right? It starts with a narrator,
right,
saying this is I can't remember what the phrase is, but it's a really old story that we're about to tell. And then a couple of times in the play, they tell the story.
Right.
It's actually a storyteller. Even if the audience has just seen that scene, right? So there is definitely, it's definitely it's a different kind of a narrative, I think, than the dramatic genre that Shakespeare's really instrumental in developing in the English theater, right? It's even be interesting to do a comparison of this play with like the mystery plays and the miracle plays of medieval Europe. Because those are also very flat, right? There's characters named Virtue, and so I don't know, maybe that's where the inspiration is coming from, but that's not, I've never seen anyone do any analysis comparing this play with that tradition.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. So what was I going to say? Oh, I was thinking about the chorus. So in this case, what I thought was really interesting is that in the play, it's written that is a guy. What is his name? His name is Gowan, I think. John Gowan. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Okay, so but in the play, in the Stratford version, instead of John Gowan, we have the Diana character.
Right.
So it gives that impression of the goddess kind of directing things instead of this guy, which according to one of the articles I read, Gowan was Shakespeare supposedly put him in as a nod to him somehow, that some part of this came from his translation of the story or something like that. I have my notes, but like it's hard to read my notes.
Well, and that relates to another something else that the actors were talking about in their interview, was the actress who played Marina and Thais and Antiochus's daughter, said that because she played these three different characters, she felt, or sort of one of her inspirations was that it's the goddess in every woman.
Oh, interesting.
And that, and there are many stories about gods and goddesses coming to Earth in the form of a human to interact with humans.
Right.
And so the fact that it's the same actress, the same bodily presence playing these different women, suggests that this idea of the goddess being behind all of the action, right? And like you said, directing it.
Yeah. And I thought it was really interesting in the end, because wasn't the woman who then became the mom in the end, wasn't that the one that was
playing Diana? Yeah.
So that kind of adds to that whole aspect.
Absolutely. Right. And then I thought that was pretty cool, because then a new woman has to step up and be Diana right at the end of the play, right? Because the last actress has left the stage as this aged Thais. Right. So it really does sort of suggest this sort of, I don't know, kinship of all women almost. Or at least they played that up. And this is also one of the actor who played Pericles said he felt the play was written as a meditation. It's definitely a father-daughter, the father-daughter dynamic. And of course, Shakespeare had two daughters. And his son had died not too long before that, I think. His only son. So he was a father with two daughters, who he probably didn't see very often because they lived back in Stratford and he was in London. So
yeah, well, and I read that one of his daughters got married right before or right around the time he was writing this.
Oh, okay. Which would make him think about fathers losing daughters, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and so that makes the second scene with the king where he's pretending to be angry, but secretly is excited that she's picked the right guy. That makes that a little bit more poignant. Like, that kind of feeling that a dad might have, being happy for his daughter, but also, oh, I don't want to let her go. It kind of brings that tension forward a little bit.
Well, and especially if you think about the times where, well, one, as we see in pretty much every one of these women, marriage means moving away, right? So Thais is going back to Tyre with her husband several months after the wedding. Right at the very end, it's like, oh, great, I have my wife and I have my daughter. We'll go here and you're going to go there, So,
yeah. I thought that was interesting. He sends his daughter home to rule Tyre, and then he goes back with his wife because her dad died.
Right.
So now he's going to go help her rule.
Right.
Her own. It's really interesting.
And of course, the other thing that, of course, every father who loved his daughter had to worry about is they get married, they're going to get pregnant. And childbirth is unbelievably risky. So as is shown in this play, right? But, it's got to be on the minds of everyone who's, has a marriageable daughter, or is a marriageable daughter, that marriage is almost inevitably going to lead to pregnancy, and pregnancy is incredibly risky.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because we talked about how the characters are flat, but that aspect of the daughter, if you look at it that way, that does kind of bring a little bit more depth to the play. If you look at it in all of those different ways with the father-daughter aspect. And so maybe he's sneaking in there.
Well, and I think that it's more, you have to add Shakespeare into the conversation at that point, right? That's what brings in the depth, is thinking about the psychology of the playwright more than the psychology of the characters in the play.
Right.
And it does make it a lot more sort of complex and interesting to think about how Shakespeare's own personal life is impacting the way that he is shaping this story, which is like a well-known and an ancient story, or at least well-known and ancient sort of nub of a story, I guess.
Right. So, and that's what let's see, what did I write down about that? So it was, like I said, it was an old Greek tale, I believe, that Gowan translated, but the hero had a different name. The hero was not named Pericles, so we got Pericles from somewhere else. But I think that's interesting because it's something that had been translated recently in that time when they were translating all of these, ancient Greek texts. And so Shakespeare had that in front of him, and his audience would have been familiar with it too, likely. Right? Or at least some of them.
Some of them would have been, it's hard to know, but, Shakespeare didn't have that much of an education himself. So if he was familiar with it, then possibly a lot of people would be as well.
Yeah, maybe something that they like with folklore, they repeated orally, and so it was a
Right.
story that caught the attention. Maybe that's why it was so popular, because here was this story brought to life. I don't know. We don't really have any idea why it was so popular.
Not in particular, other than the fact that, it's got rape and shipwreck and mistaken identities and,
Right, which are all hallmarks of that new genre of romance. The magical, people being brought back to life, the families being separated and then brought back together. It has all of those hallmarks of that
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
genre, which is interesting because The Tempest was included in that. I don't know if one of the sources I read, they said The Tempest was one of those romance plays. What do you think about that? I mean, I do see some parallels there, but The Tempest had a lot more depth to it, I felt like.
Oh, I think so too. But it's this magical story. It's not really a comedy, but it's not a tragedy.
Right.
It's some people have, smashed those words together and called Pericles a tragicomedy, which, it's just sort of ignoring the question of, well, it's not one or the other. It's got to be something different.
Yeah.
And romance, I don't know, maybe that's what sold tickets.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was evidently one of the most popular plays, which is
Right.
interesting. I think it said they had a sixth folio, which the many times had been copied, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Do some more research on that, I guess. But it was really interesting to see that, and to see it's just kind of that all of these things go wrong, but at the end there's a happy ending.
Right.
And I
Right.
think as human beings, we love that because we have so much of that in life, especially right now. You look at the world around us, we've got first it was, there was this happening, and then we had COVID, and then we had the riots, and then we have the dust cloud from Africa, and we've got murder hornets. We got like, what's next? What could possibly come next? There's a meme with like a giant chicken on the beach. That's like, what's next? A giant chicken.
It's also, I think, it's even though it's set in the ancient times and Diana is a character and it's obviously a referencing classical Greece. It's a very Christian play, right? Because good conquers evil,
right.
faith and fidelity
Mm-hmm.
are rewarded, right? Thais says, well, once again, rather than going home or traveling on to Tyre and saying, oh, by the way, I married your king, she said, okay, well, I'm just going to become a nun,
right,
in the temple of Diana and have no more joy.
Yeah.
And because she's faithful to her husband and just waits, she is eventually rewarded. And Marina is just unbelievably good.
Mm-hmm.
Unexpectedly good. No one taught her rhetoric, but she's able to talk rings around everybody and
Right.
convert them, right? The two guys coming out of the brothel going, I'm never going to do this again,
Right.
And then Pericles is almost like Job, just bad thing after bad thing after bad thing happens to him. And yet, in the end, they'll live happily ever after.
Yeah, and that's an interesting parallel to Job because he loses his wife and his children and his fortune, but then he gets them all back.
Right.
Sort of. It's a new set of kids and a new whatever, but it's kind of that same idea of if you're good, then you get this stuff back.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting.
which doesn't always happen in Shakespeare, right? Some of the bad guys, not necessarily the really bad ones, but once again, some of the sort of questionable clowns and what was it? Oh, Measure for Measure, I was reading the other week. And there's, folks, part of it takes place in a prison, and there's some really bad folks who keep escaping getting hanged. That's a great scene where someone's like, I'm too drunk to be hanged. You can't hang me. I'm drunk. You have to wait for me to sober. And it works.
Oh, goodness.
I mean, the implication is he's still going to be hanged sooner or later, but he ends the play surviving. So, it's once again, that's a very fairy tale kind of thing, is that good always triumphs over evil. I mean, everybody dies who was bad.
Right.
The king of Antioch and his daughter, the queen of dies.
Yeah. And her husband, which I thought was interesting.
Well, there's not a whole lot of distinction between actively evil and passively involved. I mean, I was struck by the fact that the princess of Antioch dies. And from our point of view, she's being viewed.
Right.
She's a victim. But if you look at the original words, they completely rewrote. I mean, it's the same idea, but they rewrote that first, the sort of prologue. And because in Shakespeare's version, she's referred to as a bad child with a worse father. So blame is being put on her, which is very common, has been unfortunately very commonly directed at victims of incest.
Right.
That they must have done something to lure whatever. And we know that's not true, and that's absolutely, unfair and right. Devastating. But in Elizabethan times, that was, I'm sure, a very common point of view. So she dies along with her father in the same way that this sort of the king that just sort of who acquiesces to the plan,
right,
dies. That was another thing that the actors were talking about, that if they did this, because this play was I think 2015 is when they filmed it. 5 years later, with the advent of Me Too, and the world has changed in the last 5 years, that they might do that differently. I'm not sure how far you can push it.
Right.
But yeah, that's another doubling, that both the person who's actively pursuing evil and the person who is sort of dragged along are both dead at the end.
Well, and there's an interesting line that I don't think they said. They didn't speak the line, I don't think, in the play, but when it talks about it in the text, it says something about those two, the Queen of Tarsus and her husband, that they were killed because of what was in their heart, not because of the action that they actually carried out, but because it was their intention. And so there was kind of this, well, it's almost a nod to, if you want to add Christianity to it, to what Jesus says, right? About how it's your heart and not what you do. It's, if you think something, it's like you've done it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so I thought that was really interesting there at the end, because it, maybe was the king, was he complicit and he was just trying to put on the show? And, it's interesting to see that little blurb in there right at the end about what the intent of your heart is, makes a difference. And I think that's kind of Shakespearean too.
Yes.
Who you are, what you do, in the forest when no one else is around makes a difference.
Right.
Your honor is important.
I just pulled this up. It says, for wicked Cleon and his wife, when fame had spread their cursed deed, and honored name of Pericles, to rage the city turn, that him and his they in their palace burn. The gods for murder seemed so content to punish them, although not done, but meant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are some interesting lines in the chorus. One of the things that I thought was really funny in the chorus was when they kept saying, and suppose, or imagine with us, this is happening now, and now imagine this, and imagine one more thing. So there's a lot going on in the chorus where they're setting the stage and telling us what's going on and helping to, because there are some really crazy transitions going on.
Well, and drawing attention to the fact that you're watching a play. You're
Right.
watching a play. I'm telling you a story.
Mm-hmm.
It's very deliberate. And I think that the Stratford staging really did play with that,
Yeah.
the only major prop was a bed.
Mm-hmm.
And the bed turned into a ship. And the bed turned in, it's almost like you're in somebody's home and they're telling you the story and they're leaping around on the furniture because that's all they have. And it's, we're telling you a story.
It's very Princess Bridey now that I think about it.
I like it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, because that's absolutely a modern fairy tale.
Mm-hmm. Really good one. I really like that one.
There's a paper for you.
Yeah.
Comparison between the Princess Bride and Pericles.
Yeah, there's even the pirates.
Yeah, right.
Oh, goodness. Well, I wasn't sure. And
I'm losing you.
if I lost Suki or if you lost me.
Oh, you're back
again.
now.
Okay, I could never tell if it's because my video kept going and yours froze. So I switched to my phone for the last couple of minutes.
Oh, well, yeah, on my end, yours froze and mine kept going. So
who knows? Oh my goodness. Well, what was I trying to say? Oh, the video, the actors and the actresses for all the different productions were so excited about doing this play. They were just like, it's such an adventure. It's so much fun. And we're doing this and that. And I thought it got me excited about watching it because it was like, it went by so fast. It was really fun to watch.
Absolutely. And I think once again, it can be fun to play those sort of broad characters, and sort of just give yourself to the fantasy of the story. The costuming was almost Dickensian, except for the one scene where they have this joust or this battle, right? Which was Elizabethan. The rest of it was very sort of top hats and frock coats, frilly dresses, which I thought was interesting because that also is sort of disjointed in time and not really set in a particular reality.
Right.
It reminded me of at the Ashland Festival many years ago, I saw Romeo and Juliet, and they dressed the adult characters, the Capulet, Lady and Lord Capulet, and in Elizabethan attire, but the younger generation, Romeo and Juliet and their cousins, in modern clothes.
Interesting.
At the same time on the stage, right? It was actually really interesting because it was pouring rain and they didn't stop the play. They just put on slickers and kept going. But the idea in this play was that they were exploring how you pass down hatred from one generation to the other, to the next. How do these young people learn to hate each other?
Right.
They haven't done anything to each other. They've just learned from their parents or their grandparents that this is what we do. And so they were trying to create that distance that between the young generation and the old generation. I don't know exactly why, the staging or the costuming was what it was, but I thought it was really interesting that they mixed it up again, to make it just not of any particular time, but some sort of fantasy, because none of it was Greek.
Right. It was very much, but it was very much that fairy tale thing. A long time ago in a place far away.
Right.
Even though we recognize the names, Tarsus and Ephesus, and these are, names.
Even Pericles, which even though he's not the Pericles, the famous, Greek.
Right. It's not the historical one.
But it's almost like it's just like this whole story is sort of patched together from bits and pieces of other stories and half remembered legends and
Yeah, it would be interesting to look, because I know that names are really important. I think we've talked about that before. It would be interesting to look into some of the other names to see if there might be more significance to some of the other names.
I don't know. Yeah.
Because it would be, I don't know.
Well, of course, Marina is named because she was born on
right. So, I mean, but some of the names of the wife and the other kings and queens, and, why they got the names that they did, it would be interesting to kind of look at that to see what significance is. It's just, I tell my students, if you're reading poetry, every little punctuation mark counts for something, right?
Right.
So it's kind of the same thing. Shakespeare imbued everything he wrote in that same way with meaning.
Absolutely.
So it would be interesting to try to uncover some of that to see if there's anything more there that would give us some more insight into what he was thinking.
Yet another paper.
Yes, I know. One of if I ever take Shakespeare again, I'll have some ideas. I'll be unique. I'll write about Pericles and fairy tales or something. All right. Well, we only have 2 left. 2 Shakespeare on stage left.
Yeah.
I believe how fast the summer is going.
I know.
It's just flying by.
But it's been so great having this stuff accessible on YouTube.
Well, if we hadn't done this, I would not have spent 8 weeks of my summer diving into Shakespeare. It's just, I hope that there are other people who are doing this along with us, because I think it really is a cool way to spend our time, especially right now when we can't really go out and do the things that we would normally do. I think you find out that there's so much more to Shakespeare than what we think.
Well, and also just, I'm so worried about theater and artists because it's all closed, and Broadway is not going to open up again until 2021. And it's not just the actors, but all of the people behind the stage and the costumers and the ticket sellers and the people, who run the deli there where you get your sandwich before the show. And I hope they continue to do this kind of thing I mean, everybody in the world watched Hamilton last weekend. Um, and we continue to have drama and theater accessible even while we're stuck at home.
Well, it's so important because I think most people, in every literature text I've ever taught from, there's a section of theater, there's a section of drama. But like we talked about earlier, when you read it as a student, it's hard because it's not meant to be read.
Mm-hmm.
But how often do we get to go see plays?
Right.
I love to go see plays, but I live in Camp Verde. So I can go watch the high school musicals, which are pretty good for Camp Verde. I'm, pretty proud of what our drama department puts on, but I don't get a chance to go. I've got 4 kids at home. I don't get a chance to go do the fun things like that. So this is giving me an opportunity even to get to watch these shows that I have always thought it would be cool to do that. And now I can from home. And I hope you're right. I hope that watching these shows kind of helps to get people excited about theater. And maybe when it can come back, it will come back with more love of theater.
Right.
We missed it, and we can kind of got these little glimpses of how great it can be to get to watch these things, to watch how these people take these scripts that are hard to understand and hard to read, and they put so much life into it.
Right.
And they make it come to life on the stage, and it's really fascinating to see that.
Well, 2 more.
Antony and Cleopatra next week, and then Romeo and Juliet, which is funny. We're ending with one everybody knows. So, but we'll hopefully get some good things out of it. We'll have all the upcoming freshmen in high school watching our next year. Like, wait a second. I need help. All right. Thank you, Suki.
All right. Have a good night, Karen.
Have a good week. Bye.
Bye.